Good evening, everyone. My name is Sheila Ramaswamy. On behalf of SAMVAD, I would like to extend a warm welcome and warm New Year wishes as well. Have a great 2022. It gives me great pleasure to first introduce SAMVAD for those of you who do not know it. SAMVAD is a national initiative for child protection, mental health, and psychosocial care. We are located in the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at NIMHANS, and we are supported by the Ministry of Women and Child Development. We work in 4 key verticals, namely child protection, mental health, education, and law and policy in a manner that is both integrated and transdisciplinary through all our initiatives ranging from research, training and capacity building, programmatic interventions in policy and law. We are delighted to bring you our newest initiative, Monday Moods with SAMVAD, and to open the new year with this initiative. Friends, we started or decided to start this initiative because we believe that, like us, all of you are ardent fans of children, and that we hope that Monday Moods with SAMVAD will be a platform to share ideas, reflections, knowledge on child and adolescent mental health. This session will be brought to you every second and fourth Monday of the month, where we hope to have various speakers, different themes on child and adolescent mental health and protection related issues. Also, should any of you wish to speak, we'd be delighted to contact us and let us know what you'd like to share or talk about. The idea is to galvanize interest and momentum in child mental health, so that child mental health is more than just an area of work, that it is a passion, that it is a movement. That's what we hope for through Monday Moods with SAMVAD. Today is our first session, and we have SAMVAD's very own Dr. John Vijaysagar, who is a professor and head of Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, as well as the principal investigator of SAMVAD, and Dr. Shekhar Sheshadri, former senior professor, Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, NIMHANS, former dean, also of behavioral sciences at NIMHANS, and former director of NIMHANS. We are happy today to kick off our session with a session by them on landscapes of child mental health. Given that we live in strange and challenging times with shifting landscapes of child mental health, where we have so many new issues of child and adolescent mental health thrown at us almost daily, whether they're about the pandemic or children's sexuality and abuse related issues, conduct issues, all of which have taken many twists and turns, especially in recent years with globalization and the many other environmental changes that are occurring in the world at large and in our country in particular. So I warmly welcome Dr. John and Dr. Shekhar to the session. Over to you. Landscapes of Child Mental Health, Monday Moods with SAMVAD.
Thank you very much, Sheila. And ladies and gentlemen, Sheila Ramaswamy is the technical and operational lead of NIMHANS. Thank you very much, Sheila, for letting the audience today know about SAMVAD, about the context of Monday Moods as well. Friends, you might have heard me saying many times in several of the programs that you may have heard, and of the 70-odd people who have joined today, there are very many familiar faces and old friends, that the landscape of the practice of child mental health cannot be restricted to the clinic. Because for every child who manages to reach us, for example, in a tertiary care, center, or may I dare say a quaternary care center of the nature, for example, that NIMHANS is, there will be 99 other children who will never manage to reach you. Therefore, the landscape of the practice of child mental health has to extend to all the spaces that children occupy and inhabit: families, childcare institutions, the street, unfortunately, work and trafficking spaces. And what the pandemic has brought to fore is that the landscape has to be transdisciplinary. And let me explain what this means. It is not enough for a child mental health professional to make a diagnosis of PTSD in the context of a child who's undergone trauma. You have to assist the child through legal processes and police inquiry and all the secondary re-victimization and traumatization that takes place there. Similarly, it is not enough for a judicial personnel to listen to testimony to make an adjudication. You need to know developmental and mental health implications of evidence gathering. Who is the child? Is this a 3-year-old? Is this an 8-year-old? Is this an 8-year-old bright child or an 8-year-old child with intellectual disability? Is this a 14-year-old who is bright? Is this a 14-year-old who has such severe PTSD that he or she is unable to even speak? It is not that the pandemic has made us aware of these expanding landscapes. They were always present. But the nature of child mental health practice and the nature of child mental health training is such that it has taken us this far in the last couple of years for child mental health to really become a national agenda. And it is my honor and pride to tell you that what SAMVAD has done is that it has managed to take child mental health to the parliament, and it has managed to take child mental health to the Supreme Court of this country. As Sheila pointed out, this has to be something in public consciousness, almost to the level of a public campaign. It has never ceased to surprise John and me. For example, in a 3-year postgraduate training program in psychiatry, let's say 3 months in neurology, 3 months in consultation liaison, 3 months in behavior therapy, etc. And you spend 24 months training in adult psychiatry and 3 months in child. Please do not misunderstand me when I say what I'm about to say now. But I've said this in public very often. I'm saying this again. What is so special about adults that we need to spend 24 hours in training in adult psychiatry and 3 months in child when 40% of the population are children and adolescents? I'm not saying it has to be 50-50. How about 21 and 6? How about 18 and 9? Now, these are questions that I put to you as the august audience today to ponder and cogitate and ruminate about. But there is yet another very critical issue here. How many teaching hospitals have a well-established department of psychiatry? How many well-established departments of psychiatry in a teaching hospital run a postgraduate course? And how many departments of psychiatry in a teaching hospital that run a postgraduate course have specialized services for child mental health? It is no surprise, therefore, that in the department that John heads, every year, almost 30 to 40 institutions across the country send their postgraduates to us for training, anywhere ranging from 2 weeks to 1 month to 3 months. Essentially to enhance their exposure to child mental health, to formats of assessment, to case conceptualization, to intervention planning, and where child mental health plays out in child welfare committees, juvenile justice boards, childcare institutions, and all the service providers who come into contact with children. So this is something that we need to keep in mind where coming out of the pandemic, whenever that will take place, it's very likely that the fourth wave is going to be a mental health wave. This has not been predicted yet, but structural equation models do say that with escalating amounts of anxiety and intolerance of uncertainty, and many changes having occurred in people's lives, a very significant reset is required to the rupture that has been caused in our lives. And it is in this context that we've put together this evening's program. Now, John and I had several conversations on what we would like to share with you today, friends. And we've divided it into 4 parts. One is the background, the history. Baal or Kishore Manorog Kshetra ka itihas kya hai? What is the history? You know, the first child guidance clinic established in the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And when did child really come into the consciousness of the psychiatric fraternity, the mental health fraternity? When was the Indian Association of Child and Adolescent Mental Health formed? And their academy, which has recently started an online training program. So there is history. There is the importance and significance. Why should we concern ourselves with child mental health? I must tell you, friends, that last year in November, we held a national consultation on child mental health as part of SAMVAD. We had over 30 psychiatrists from all over the country, from 6 of the All India institutes, from CIP Ranchi, from Lokpriya Bordla Institute in Tejpur, and from many centers of excellence across the country, Chennai, Agra, Kerala, Kozhikode, so Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal, to sab jagah se log aaye. And the essence of this kind of work has really led to an expansion, because the importance of child and adolescent mental health is essentially to spread this network, but the significance and importance also is the impact that COVID is going to have on child development. So there's history, there's important and significance. And then there are the challenges, and then the ways forward. So today's session is divided into these 4 parts. John, some years ago, wrote a very fine paper on the history of child mental health in this country. It was published in an international publication. In examining this history, John, take us all today, almost 100 of us today, into what the history of child mental health in India has been, and how does that relate to the landscapes that we have to keep in our consciousness and keep in our mind as we go forward in our endeavors to support the mental health of children. History, John?
Thank you, sir. So before we look at the historical background of child and adolescent mental health in our country, so let us briefly look at the history globally. Till the early 19th century, there was really no efforts that were being made to look at child mental health systematically in the medical literature. And also by 1885, Ebbinghaus, Hermann Ebbinghaus was a person who was a German psychiatrist who had published the first textbook on child and adolescent mental health, and it was in German language. And subsequently, 10 years later, in 1895, Henry Maudsley had published a textbook written in English language on childhood mental disorders. And during that period, there was very little efforts, I would say, to look at child and adolescent mental health in a holistic way. And subsequently, in the year 1900, there was a Swedish author who had, by name Ellen Key, who had written an interesting book which she titled as The Century of the Child. According to Ellen Key, she had named the 20th century would be one of a child related to the child, and also something related to child mental health. That has that had kind of led to a lot of interest in the field. And subsequently, there were efforts towards the direction of setting up some services for the children with different disorders. The initial efforts were mainly with children who had neurodevelopmental conditions, and that is children with mental retardation. Those days, different terms were used for mental retardation, which were quite pejorative in nature. Terms like idiocy, imbecility, etc. And in France, the first hospital for treatment of children with mental retardation was started, and this was mostly efforts by the pediatricians, and also some of the psychiatrists who were there who worked in liaison with them. And subsequently, in the 1930, Leo Kanner was the first person who became the chair of child psychiatry at the Johns Hopkins, the US. And around that time, there was parallelly, there was the development of the field of developmental psychology, and a unique field in the psychology discipline, wherein several psychologists led by Jean Piaget and subsequently Lev Vygotsky, etc., they had come out with a lot of their theoretical conceptualizations about child development and also the child mental health. And after that period, subsequently, there was no formal training that was available in child psychiatry anywhere in the world. And in the 1950s, initially the IACAPAP, which is the International Association for Child Psychiatry and Allied Professions, it was started in the year 1953. And subsequently in 1954 and 1957, both the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and also the European Society for Child and Adolescent Psychiatry were initiated. And one of the important milestones for setting up of the services for children with mental health problems other than the neurodevelopmental disorders began with the mental hygiene movement, which started initially in the US. And this subsequently led to the child guidance kind of initiatives and setting up of several child guidance clinics in the US as well as the European countries, including UK. And the child guidance clinics were actually set up in the community. And initially, the child guidance clinic were set up with the objective of looking at children with behavioral conditions, especially the conduct disorder, and especially the adolescents with conduct symptoms. They were getting into some of the activities which led them into conflict with the law. So to address these behavioral issues, the child guidance clinics became functioning actively. Subsequently, in the US, the initial training for child and adolescent psychiatry had started, and later on followed by the other European countries. In India, the first child guidance clinic was initiated at the Tata Institute of Social Science in Mumbai. And eventually, there are a lot of this child guidance clinic became very popular. And in many cities across the India, these child guidance clinics were established, and they started functioning mostly with the available resources and looking at primarily children with behavioral and developmental kind of disorders. And these child guidance clinics were primarily providing psychosocial interventions targeted towards the families, mainly the psychoeducation, and also they had provided brief psychological counseling to the family members of children with behavioral disorders and developmental conditions. And subsequently, many general hospital psychiatry units across the country, they started providing some services in child and adolescent psychiatry, that too in very many different ways. And these general hospital psychiatry units, primarily there were different service delivery models. One of the models was that of the pediatrics departments in those hospitals running the child guidance clinics. And there was not much participation by the mental health professionals, as Professor Shekhar mentioned earlier. Like these, many of these hospitals, they lacked individual departments of psychiatry in those days. And a few of the psychiatrists who were trained abroad, they were available in mainly the cities, and they were providing some services to the children. Eventually, the child guidance clinic was established in the at NIMHANS, which earlier we used to have the name of All India Institute of Mental Health, in the year 1957. And over a period of time, tertiary care institutions like PGH Chandigarh, AIMS, etc., and even certain hospitals in Hyderabad, like the Nilofer Hospital, they started providing these services, and they became very popular. And only in the 1970 to 1980s, there was this thought process about a need for a training in the Indian context, need for training mental health professionals in the Indian context, especially the psychiatrists in the area of child and adolescent psychiatry. However, it took almost 3 decades before these kind of training courses were initiated. Initially, the first fellowship course, which was called as a postdoctoral fellowship, which is a 1-year course in child and adolescent psychiatry, was initiated at NIMHANS, Bangalore. And subsequently, the DM course in child and adolescent psychiatry was initiated in the year 2011. And subsequently, we have seen that these, especially the fellowship and DM courses, became popular as all across the country, there was a lot of interest, and several trainees had come to NIMHANS, and they had undergone the training. And some of the institutes started their own courses. So currently, we have a DM course in child and adolescent psychiatry at PDH Chandigarh, and we have postdoctoral fellowship in child and adolescent psychiatry at JIPMER Pondicherry. And we also have some of the private institutes across the country having these fellowship courses. Some of the prominent institutions are CMC Vellore. And there is also a plan to roll out these courses in the coming years in a few more centers across the country. And we have recently the IACAM, that is the Indian Association of Child and Adolescent Mental Health, which had started as a formal organization for child and adolescent mental health in the Indian context in the year 1991. in the recent months, they have started the academy, which is a training kind of program for mental health professionals who are interested to pursue a training in child and adolescent mental health. And this is a very novel, recent initiative in the history of child and adolescent mental health in India.
Thank you very much, John. And as you register this entire journey, shall I say, I would invite all of you to basically think about some of the stuff that John has spoken. And as we come towards the end of the program, we have time for you to put questions to both John and myself. You can put the questions on chat, or you can use the hands raise option, and we would be happy to engage in a dialogue to really make this session that much more meaningful. Friends, I want to draw your attention to a couple of important points that John has made and segue from there into the aspect of significance. When John started referring to the whole issue of international history, a term that comes to mind is global mental health, or in our context, global child mental health. So if we really look at landscapes, and what does global mental health or global child mental health means? And you remember John also referred to, in the whole journey, a particular epoch when developmental psychology, particularly, the Piaget, Vygotsky, Kohlberg, and people of that persuasion, and the influence and impact that they had. How does child development vary across the global north and the global south? How does conflict and trauma manifest itself in the global north or in the global south? Are there patterns of child rearing that vary across cultures? What impact does culture have on the way that symptomatology manifests? Now, you'll remember from adult psychopathology, this whole business about how depression manifests as somatization in some of the Eastern cultures, whereas it is articulated as sadness or depression in Occidental cultures, or the whole phenomena of guilt versus shame, that Judeo-Christian cultures are guilt-based, whereas Occidental, Oriental cultures are more shame-based cultures. And how does that? So all this is part of global child mental health. So how does child psychopathology manifest across is an issue to keep in mind. Now, it's interesting what John said, that when the whole attention that children could also have problems, so how can a child have depression? How can a young child have depression? The whole idea that a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old cannot have depression, despite the fact that Ainsworth and Bowlby spoke about attachment and anxiolytic depression and so on, quite way back in the history of child mental health. And John referred to the 20th century being described as perhaps the century of the child. But my question to you is, what about the 21st century? Things have changed, the digital, many of you here, and perhaps John and I, are digital immigrants. The children of today are digital natives. And what the pandemic has done, is that going to make a difference? And look at what John said about the whole emphasis on neurodevelopmental disorders, but not so much on emotions and behavior, as though children are not sentient human beings. And then the focus initially on child mental health, again to developmental issues and to behavior. And now the wheel has come a full circle when we are saying that COVID is a current pandemic. Adverse childhood experiences has been an everlasting epidemic. So you see how wide our landscape has become, and the milestones that John has put to you in terms of the history. And my appeal to you, friends, is what milestones will you create for child mental health wherever you are? Gaurang Thanki jahan bhi hai, wherever Ann Thomas is, wherever Ganesh Kumar is, wherever Bhavesh is, wherever Bhupendra is, wherever Amrita Joshi is, what milestones will you create in your space to create the kind of history to accommodate the challenges that the expanding landscape is going to put on us? Because people will call you, the police will call you, the judiciary will call you, schools will call you, parent groups will call you, the media will call you. And to be able to represent the reality of children in a way that is evocative and persuasive is the kind of challenge. And this is why Monday Moods. This brings me to the whole issue, John, of considering this history and the way that the milestones were structured and where we are today in terms of the extent to which child mental health has developed in this country or not, as the case may be. What do you see as the importance and significance in the context of the increasing demands and requests and challenges and the landscape of practice that has expanded? John?
Yes, sir. So, with regards to the significance or importance of child and adolescent mental health, briefly, let us look into the demographics of the child and adolescent population. So, children and adolescents, they put together, they constitute almost 1/3 of the world's population. And close to 90% of the children and adolescents, they live in low and middle income countries. So these low and middle income countries, I would say that they have got the maximum number of children and adolescents, and therefore the addressing the child mental health issues in the low and middle income countries is of immense importance. And also in each of these countries, low and middle income countries, on an average, anywhere between 30 to 40% of the population is below the age of 18 years. So in our country, this proportion is around the 40%. When we talk about the importance of mental health in children, first and foremost, we need to understand that the mental health and child development, they are closely interlinked. So for a child, right from the time he or she is born, through the various developmental stages till they become adults, they go through the childhood and adolescence. So during these phases, these are the critical stages of one's lifespan. And during these critical stages, even in terms of their neurobiological development, research has clearly shown, there are a lot of research studies which have shown that the brain development is happening at a very rapid pace during that time. And we know that within this period of childhood and adolescence, the initial period, that is the early childhood period, is again the most crucial period. So till the age of, from the birth till the age of 5 years is considered a very crucial or critical period of child development. And during this period, the brain development happens at a very rapid pace. And also there another period of critical importance after this early childhood period is the adolescence period, where in the brain there are a lot of unique changes, what I would say, like in terms of whatever structure that has formed, that gets pruned to an extent wherein the relevant networks or the connections between the different brain areas are strengthened, and some of the not so relevant ones are they are pruned, so that the adolescent becomes ready biologically also to become an adult. And during this entire period, Sir had talked about the adverse childhood experiences. So childhood and adolescence period is, as I mentioned, it's a very important period of one's lifespan. And the experiences what a child or an adolescent goes through in their lifetime during these periods is they go through a lot of unique experiences. And some of those experiences are adverse in nature. And again, these adverse childhood experiences, which are abbreviated as ACEs, ACE, and these ACEs are strongly correlated with the development of several mental health conditions. These include behavioral disorders and anxiety disorders, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder. So a whole range of disorders are linked to the adverse childhood experiences. Also, it is very well known that adverse childhood experience in itself can impact the child development. Another very important aspect of the child and adolescent mental health is investing in child and adolescent mental health is crucial for positive outcomes during the adulthood. And these positive outcomes happen in the area of work functioning, academic functioning, interpersonal functioning, and even in the area of physical health, and of course in the area of mental health. So research has shown that close to 60 to 70% of all the mental disorders that we see in the adults have an onset, especially during the later childhood and adolescence period. And early identification of these problems during those phases of life and early initiation of specific interventions will lead to better outcomes during the adulthood. And not identifying these kind of problems during the childhood and adolescence, and especially not providing the psychological support for children and adolescents when they face the adverse childhood experiences, leads to long-term unfavorable kind of outcomes, and especially persistence of mental health problems into adulthood. So this is clearly evidenced in multiple research studies that have happened over the years. And so this phase, that is the childhood adolescence phase of one's life, should be taken as by any mental health professional as a window of opportunity to clearly understand the role of the unique experience, what I mentioned, and some of them being adverse experiences. So the adverse childhood experience could be in several contexts. And these contextual factors, they act as risk factors for various mental health conditions which I had mentioned. And these examples of these kind of factors include family conflict, exposure of child to different forms of abuse. It could be physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, etc. And neglect of children, and children who are exposed to separation from parents, or children who have lost parents, children who are staying in childcare institutions for a long period of time, or children who develop chronic medical conditions that affects their physical health status. Children who have certain developmental issues that can start very early in the childhood. They are also at increased risk of facing this kind of adverse childhood experience, because we know that those children can be subjected to traumatic experiences more often compared to the typically developing children. So this is, as I mentioned, this is a very important phase, and it gives us a window of opportunity for all the mental health professionals to work closely with the children and adolescents and to intervene. And some of these factors, they can be modified to certain extent, and also allowing these factors to persist also has shown that uh, the brain changes can happen both in the structure and the functioning of brain. There are also neurobiological studies which have looked at some of the structural changes in brain which can happen with persistent traumatic experience which children go through.
Thank you, John. Pallavi Abhilasha, I've noted your question on undergraduate curriculum, and we will take that in the final question and answer session. But again, friends, John has raised certain very important issues. And I would, when talking about ELMIC countries, I would draw your attention to the Lancet Global Mental Health Series, which really gives a perspective on service delivery, based on the whole MH gap paradigm. But there's a very interesting question, John, from Arzu, which is when she raises the question of what about prenatal development. And I wanted to let you know that under Dr. Prabha Chandra, NIMHANS has been running for many years a service called perinatal psychiatry. And the whole area of infant psychiatry, which is kind of linked to perinatal. And John has been involved in a project which NIMHANS has with Liverpool called the Viral study, and the Bangalore component was called BCHADS study. So in terms of pregnant mothers, newborns, and what is the kind of impact that maternal mental health and well-being has to do with so some of the prenatal issues and how they spill over. John, a brief comment on that?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So during the pregnancy, especially in the first trimester, factors like maternal stress, depression and anxiety disorders in mother, also any infections in the mother, or maternal exposure to certain pollutants has been linked to a negative impact on the fetal development. And also studies have shown that with persistent exposures during the pregnancy, the children who are born to these mothers, they are more likely to have aberrant development, and also they are likely to have increased risk of externalizing disorders, especially conditions like ADHD. Though we can't see it as a causal factor, but it is often a risk factor. And also another important factor is the maternal nutrition during the pregnancy. So the BCHADS project, which Sir was referring to, is the Bangalore Child Health and Development Study, which was modeled on the Viral Child Health and Development Study, which was carried out by the investigators in Liverpool, UK. So the Bangalore Child Health and Adolescent Study, already there was a cohort of pregnant mothers who are living in the urban community in Bangalore. And the children born to those mothers, they were followed up right from the time of the birth till their age of two years, and with repeated developmental and behavioral assessments. And also during the pregnancy, these mothers, in an earlier study, as I was mentioned, it was a cohort of pregnant mothers. So they had undergone cross-sectional assessments and also longitudinal assessments for maternal stress, maternal depression, maternal anxiety, etc. So it was clearly shown that at 1 year and 2 years of age, these children who are born to mothers who experience significant maternal depression and maternal anxiety had certain temperamental kind of issues, especially of difficult temperament, and also they were likely to have some developmental delays, and they were also having certain behavioral problems at the age of 2 years. So these kind of studies are very limited in our Indian context. So at least at the age of 2 years, these kind of findings were noted from the study. So right from the stage of fetal development in the mother's womb to that of the adolescence phase, a child experiences several adverse childhood experiences. So these are very important, and they can affect the child development as well as the child mental health.
Thank you, John. I also recognize when we are on the subject of landscapes, that several of the examples that you gave when you spoke about early childhood experiences, and I'm reminded, friends, that we lost Sir Michael Rutter last year. He passed away last year, and Sir Michael Rutter's famous Romanian adoption study of these kids who were in childcare institutions in Romania during the regime of Nicolae Ceausescu, and thereafter, when they were taken out and put into places where there were better stimulation. Also, the issue that John has raised about adolescence and some of the challenges of gender and sexuality. Let me give you an example of the whole issue on the Nirbhaya case itself. This whole idea that this 17-year-old was the most cruel of the lot. Now, was that based in fact, or was there a trial of media already? And it has by now been established that he, in fact, was not. So is that the truth? The fact that he lived 80-90 kilometers away from Delhi and had one mentally ill, untreated, dysfunctional parent, is that the truth? That he was in school, had a learning issue, was punished by a teacher and dropped out, is that the truth? That he shifted to Delhi to support a family consisting of one mentally ill, untreated, dysfunctional parent and two younger sisters, is that the truth? That till 4 months before the Nirbhaya episode, he was in touch with the family, sending money home. Is that the truth? That 4 months before the episode, he lost contact with the family and then was befriended by these transport people, and somewhere perhaps the transformation of his psyche took place. Is that the truth? Now, you know that the Juvenile Justice Act has two components: children in need of care and protection and children in conflict with the law. My question to you all is, where was the Juvenile Justice Act when this kid was in need of care and protection? My second question, or second point, is even more awesome in the way that it is gobsmacking. People ask, why was the Juvenile Justice Act changed? And people will say Nirbhaya case, and of course we are concerned about women's safety, and we feel very strongly about that. Friends, in Nirbhaya, the JJ Act was changed because a teacher punished a child. If that teacher had not punished the child, he would have never dropped out of school, never come to Delhi. The whole episode would not have taken place. School is the safest place for a child to be in. And if a child has conduct disorder or an ADHD, the worst thing you can do is suspend him from school, because you are ensuring that he will be with other deviant peers, and then the pathways to vulnerability. And in fact, when we did the national consultation, our director, Dr. Pratima Murthy, spoke about the upstream and the downstream, the point that John made. If you do not treat something now, what happens to it later? Now, this discontinuity paradigm, again, in the landscape of practice, we know that developmental disorders like autism have homotypic continuity, but ADHD has heterotypic continuity: residual ADHD, impulse control, substance abuse, mood disorder, sociopathy, relationship problems, academic problems, deviant behaviors, conflict with the law. So you see how heterotypic the whole issue is, and the importance, therefore, of recognizing some of this in the increasing landscapes of practice. That we have received several more issues on training and the role of pediatricians in supporting the scaffolding that we need to bring for child mental health. In fact, Anuradha raised the issue of pediatrician training and what is available. Our good friend Rajiv Seth, who is currently the president of the International Association for Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect, is also on the session today. And he's also raised some critical issues on chat, which I will allude to. The Indian Academy of Pediatrics has an I-Cancel group, the Indian Child Abuse, Neglect and Child Labor, but they are also involved with the Indian Child Protection Medical Professionals Network. So you see how expanded our landscape of operation can be. And we will address this in the last part of the session today. Finally, John, in terms of challenges and the way forward, after we have laid this framework of how the history evolved and where we are currently, what is the significance and importance of strengthening child mental health training? What do you see, John, as the challenges and the way forward from these challenges?
Yes, thank you, sir. I would like to list out a few challenges before discussing about the way forward. So the first one is the limited training opportunities. So there have been questions already from the group, like with regards to training for pediatricians. Of course, earlier in the introductory remarks, sir had commented on the training for psychiatrists itself as part of their DPM or MD courses in psychiatry. So the training, even during the MD or whatever the courses for pediatrics or psychiatry, we see that there is a very limited kind of focus on child and adolescent mental health, and most of it is a very theoretical aspect in the curriculum, and also this child mental health conditions, except probably for pediatricians, few of the developmental conditions like intellectual disability or ADHD or autism spectrum disorder. Apart from that, the child psychiatric disorders, no, they are not given importance in the training. And another challenge is basically the focus on the disorders per se, rather than a focus on the child mental health, child and adolescent mental health, very specific disorder focus or a condition focus, and also focus on the diagnosis and management of these disorders. So most of the textbooks, if you see the psychiatry textbooks also, you see that the focus is mostly on the classification and nosology of the disorders, and then some points on the management of these disorders and how these conditions can be diagnosed, with probably a couple of points on differential diagnosis, but not much on child mental health as we see in different contexts. So the family contextual factors, then the school or neighborhood related factors, how the development of the child is interlinked with the mental health, and also the adverse childhood experience, what we talked about some time back. So the overemphasis of this diagnosis and treatment of disorders is one lack. So other thing is lack of like whether it's the pediatricians or mental health like psychiatrists or clinical psychologists or special educators or teachers or legal professionals who work with children, we hardly interact, and it's often our own islands of work. We are working in small groups or within our own spheres of influence, but there is lack of this multidisciplinary kind of approach, even in training also, and also in practice. And the transdisciplinary part, that is something sir had initially mentioned in his introductory remarks, that's also lacking, wherein for example, to give you a simple example, like if I sit in the outpatient clinic, and if a child is seen by a neurologist, a pediatric neurologist or a speech pathologist, and a child comes for my consultation, so the truly transdisciplinary approach would be not just referring the child to those clinicians, or for that matter, like if the child is he comes from the community and is identified by one of the members of the NGO or by a school teacher, a true transdisciplinary approach would be the professional understanding the exact challenges and the limitations of the other professional who is working in the other discipline. Like, for example, how would speech pathologists conduct their kind of assessments with these children, or how would a pediatric neurologist conduct those assessments, or how would an NGO member who is working in the community, who is trying to provide support to these children who have several adverse childhood experience, how are they functioning and what are their limitations? How do they carry about doing their work? So I think that understanding is very important. It has to start right from the training. Also, we see that in our country, there are several policies and legislations. There is no dearth of these policies and legislations. And of course, some of the large kind of programs and policies, like say, for example, the ICDS program, which was initiated in 1975, to the recent Rashtriya Bal Swasthya Karyakram, Rashtriya Kishore Suraksha Karyakram, etc. And so there are several policies and programs, but what we see is between the various departments or various ministries in the governments, both in the central as well as the state governments, we see the lack of intersectoral coordination. So, say, for example, the health ministry or the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Women and Child Development, or the social welfare. So, all these ministries, both at the center and state level, they have several policies and programs. And many a time we see that due to the lack of intersectoral coordination, there is the smooth functioning of many of these policies and programs is not happening in the country. And in terms of the fund allocation, like I had initially talked about the low and middle income countries having 90% of the child and adolescent population. But if you look at the budget that is allocated, the funds that are allocated for health, it is a very minuscule amount, and out of the total budget. And compared to some of the developed countries, within that, the funds that are allocated for the mental health, and that too specifically for children and adolescents, there is no specific allocated amount. So that is the one of the major challenges. And also in terms of the existing policies and programs, there is no quality control, or there is no periodic mechanism of looking at the outcomes of these policies and programs. Like, say, for example, a program has been initiated in the earliest program, as I mentioned, was ICDS, and more recent programs also, RBSK, RKSK, etc. So every year, like, what are the outcomes and what are the deliverables out of these programs? So that kind of exercise doesn't happen. And in terms of also the interventions, what I feel is in the area of child and adolescent mental health, there is limited focus on the preventive and promotive interventions. And especially the preventive and promotive interventions, there is a lot of scope in the community setting, especially in the schools. So if you see the school mental health kind of initiatives, typically, very few examples within our country where some like substantial work has been done in the schools in terms of preventive promotive interventions. But otherwise, it's just probably a visit to the schools and an interaction with the teachers, or probably a lecture to the teachers, a one-off kind of training program, etc., without any ongoing kind of efforts to address the mental health in the schools. Recently, the WHO came up with this health promoting schools concept. And in that, the health promoting schools, there is a mention of looking at the mental health and well-being of children. And so, though importance has been given for these things, when it actually comes to the situation on ground, there's a lot that needs to be done. So these are all the challenges. And also, lastly, there is, in all these areas in our country, there is limited research. So really, in terms of the research output, there is very limited literature, and most of the research is there from the more of hospital or clinic settings, which sir had earlier pointed out, saying that child and adolescent mental health is not restricted to just the clinic settings. So unfortunately, but the research emanates from those kind of settings, looking at mostly the disorder or condition specific kind of research, looking at some interventions which they have tried in the clinic or hospital settings, and the response to those interventions, etc.
Thank you very much, John. And I think in terms of looking at the way forward, one way to deal with it in this session of Monday Moods is to look at many of the questions that have really come in. And I will start by addressing some of them. And there are a number of issues pertaining to school, both positive and otherwise. Amrita Joshi, for example, says the school mental health program is the most important thing and needs promotion. But Anne, on the other hand, says school is often the source of the trauma with the way teachers behave and bullying and so on. But let's come to what Mujtaba is asking. What's the total number of child psychiatrists in this country? You know, it's interesting. If you'd asked this question about 15 or 16 years later, I'm reminded of a particular incident where an American and a Russian were racing together, and the American won the race and the Russian didn't. And Pravda reported the next day, the Russian came second and the American came last but won. So many years ago, when people introduced me to say, you know, meet Dr. Shekhar is one of the best child psychiatrists in the country, I would say, yes, there are only 4. So, but the Indian Association of Child and Adolescent Mental Health has approximately 700 members. These are people who are interested, deeply interested in the area. If you look at the number of DMs who've come out of NIMHANS, it's a total of about perhaps 12 to 15 who've come out, and another 4 or 5 from Chandigarh. So the total number of qualified DMs and the total number of postdoctoral fellows with the private CMC Bangalore, St. John's, Nair Hospital, Hyderabad as well, and JIPMER and NIMHANS put together would be perhaps about 30 or 40. But I think that the area is definitely expanding. But in order to really expand both laterally, the whole issue that Pallavi started with John about undergraduate training in child psychiatry and what Rajiv put as compulsory child mental health training for pediatricians, how do we do it given the small number of child psychiatrists themselves who are available? That one of the things that I can definitely say that one of SAMVAD's mandates is to work with pediatricians and run some of these programs. In fact, many of the programs that we are running one right now on child mental health and forensics, which Raji would be happy to know, is attended by Preeti Galgali, including the first session from her hospital bed. That's how committed she was. That. So we would need to really look at some of these issues. And in an undergraduate curriculum, the National Medical Council Commission, NMC, is now looking at undergraduate curriculum, and there's a whole lot of new inclusions that have come in: gender and sexuality on the one hand, psychiatry on the one hand. And in fact, Dr. B.N. Gangadhar, the former director of NIMHANS, is part of NMC right now. And as part of that curriculum, we hope that something would happen. There are many other issues, John, but let's take the issue about school teachers. Now, Gaurang, for example, also said that very often, teachers unnecessarily label exuberant children as ADHD and says the school is the source of the trauma, whereas some other people have said that school is a place where child mental health can ideally play out. Your opinion, John?
Thank you, sir. So in terms of this, the school teachers, their I would say, the concerns with regards to the classroom behavior of children, and the labeling of children with you know terms like saying that, like, for example, very commonly children with learning difficulties, they're labeled as being very lazy, and they have very low intelligence, and they can't learn at all. Or children who have some mild behavioral issues, immediately they are labeled as having a syndromal ADHD, and or sometimes even they may label the child as having some form of mental illness, and child cannot be included in the regular classroom setting, and child may require a special school, etc. So I think the problem needs to be addressed. There are no, I would, what I believe is there are no quick fixes to these kind of problems, and no, this has to be taken up for a long term. And one of the common things what we see when we try to work with schools, especially with teachers, is that too in the government setting, like government schools, is that very often they are burdened with a lot of activities, and that's one common thing what they in fact they almost complain about. Like in fact, Sir's earlier project, which was initiated in 2014, which was a 4-year project between 2014 and 18, a community child and adolescent mental health services project, which was done during his tenure as a senior professor before his retirement in the department. So during that, a lot of activities with the government schools were taken up, and one of the common things that were observed is that the teachers would complain, saying that they are already overburdened with a lot of activities, and they are unable to deliver these kind of interventions, whether it's the life skills kind of training or any other programs, gender sexuality related kind of thing in the school context.
In short, John, what you're saying is that training,
yes, sir,
and standardization of training is important. In fact, Arzu raises a very important issue. She's saying many service providers are not trained but continue to provide services, and instead of actually assisting, do more damage. Because and one of the mandates of SAMVAD, which the Honorable Minister was very clear, is that she wanted standardized training across the country. Standardized, rather than different people doing, and this is why SAMVAD does not undertake training. Say when people call and say, Doctor Saab, 20 minute का session लीजिए. I said 20 minute में मैं I will not be able to. अच्छा ठीक है 40 minute कर लीजिए. And Sheila, as the technical and operational lead, is very, very clear on this issue. Ki if one is not about ticking the boxes, but you're serious about training, then we need to treat training as sacred and sacrosanct. And one of SAMVAD's mandate with teachers, with childcare service providers, with schools, is these standardized programs. And these are available for SAMVAD. In fact, some of them are on the YouTube channel. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel and have a look at it. That John, Sana has raised the issue of young offenders. Our colleague from Orissa speaks about child pornography. Someone else spoke about lifestyle and parenting, a lot of issues on parenting and this business of mobile phones. Shabina spoke about screen time and child mental health. So this entire scenario is something that we have been concerned about, and I wanted to beat all of them together to form a response. See, where young offenders are concerned, or alleged offenders, or we don't even want to call them offenders. These are young people who come into conflict with the law. As John pointed out, pathways to vulnerability. Invariably, a child in conflict with the law comes from a background of abuse, neglect, as school dropout, deviant peer group, abuse at home, witnessing domestic violence, substance use in the family members. So there is genetic vulnerability, there is experiential vulnerability, there are adverse childhood experiences and which is where our position on this is to look at the vulnerability. We call it as the principle of proportionality. the seriousness of the offense versus the seriousness of the circumstances that the child comes from. And many children who actually abuse younger children, even a 10 or a 12-year-old abusing a 7 or 8-year-old, if you take a history, invariably, where did their exposure to sexuality come from? Were they abused themselves? So these are issues that we have written extensively about in some of the material that is present in the website that we have given, which is nimhanschildprotect.in. And all this exposure of the issue of pornography, of internet gaming disorder, the whole spectrum of behavioral addictions and its relationship to lifestyle and parenting, and the kind of challenges, not just of the 21st century child, but the 21st century parent and their predicament is also something that we are keeping in mind. That so both the Indian Academy of Pediatrics, the Indian Association of Child and Adolescent Mental Health have come out with guidelines on screen time, as indeed the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Mental Health, age-wise, and considering the pandemic and the lockdown, this whole digitization of education and online stuff, we can't wish the digital world away. We need to find mechanisms to essentially circumvent or even subvert it. And so this is the kind of stuff that we want to really keep in mind. So thank you very much for all these questions on undergraduate curriculum, on pediatric training, on prenatal development, on the impact of screen time, on labeling issues, on compulsory child mental health training for pediatricians, and the point that Chintan has raised about rehabilitation in the context of disability and government mandates on that, school as the source of trauma, about young children who come into conflict with the law, about mental health, and of course the comment that Bhavesh made, which is that this has been a very motivating situation. Thank you very much for that, Bhavesh. And in fact, the reason why we've started Monday Moods is to create a network of practitioners and a community of researchers. The whole issue of research that has been mentioned when Amruta Joshi speaks about school social work training, when Kamala Iyer speaks about can private practitioners do research and how do they, these are all things that we would be honored to assist and enable, so that this whole community and network which really takes child mental health into the public consciousness. And this is the whole impact of Samvad. As Nelson Mandela said, the true worth of a nation is judged by the way its children are treated. And to also quote Reverend recently last year, when he said, if an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you call yourself neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. So we have to take a stand, and a stand in favor of child mental health. Thank you very much for your participation. We'll be back 2 weeks from now on the 4th Monday with another episode of Monday Moods, where indeed we hope to segue into global mental health with 2 other people, dear colleagues of us, who will address this. And with this, I hand you over to Sheila to close the session, thanking John for his wisdom and his knowledge about the whole history, significance, and challenges of child mental health. Sheila, over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, to Dr. John, it was fascinating to hear about the history of child psychiatry. Many things I never knew. I think, like perhaps others on this group, we need to go to your paper for more. Dr. Shekhar, as always, thank you for the excellent facilitation and for guiding us through a maze of child mental health issues. Most of all, thank you everyone for coming this evening to the session. We hope that we keep this spirit, this enthusiasm, and this momentum through the year, as we delve deeper and deeper into several of the issues that have already been raised for us today. In fact, you've given us ideas to pick up on all these issues, and we assure you we will. So I'm sure dinner is awaiting. With that, you may all be relieved now that Monday is over. Have a good rest of the week. Thank you very much on behalf of Team SAMVAD, and good night.